Alright, this is final milestone demos for I'm going to do demos 1 through 5 in this video. Before we get started, I just want to call out for the time system. I am not using the time system that was given to us because I started this before it was given to us, and it took, I didn't have time, I didn't get around to implementing the one, although I do recognize that would be a better way to do it. Instead, I just have these time objects, and I just check if those time objects have passed. So that's how I do the timer system. The other thing that's different that, again, we talked about in class was how I do the timers. So I keep timers on the sound calls individually, and whenever it's played or stopped or the sound ends, the start and stop times are updated. In classes, talked about how it would be better to keep those within the same frame so they're synchronized, and also so that you're keeping all that data kind of consolidated rather than on each individual sound call, and that makes sense to me, especially from a when you get larger with your projects, keeping everything in sync, that makes sense. So in future projects, that's what I'll use, but in this one, that is not what is being done. So you will see that not every sound that the sound calls don't match up on their times, and that it shows little decimal values, small decimal values, because it's the true time rather than the frame rate time. So just you'll notice that. All right. So with that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I'm gonna kick off the demo. I'm gonna start with demo number 1. Alright, so that one was pretty straightforward at this point. One thing I will say, though, that I found out during creating this final demo, is the cleanup system that I had. It actually errored out if I started the next demo too soon, because I still had items in the sound table that were still playing, even though I couldn't hear anything. The files, I'm assuming, still had other items left. And it was causing an error, so I ended up making sure that all sounds are stopped in the sound table, and then I delete the sounds, and that prevents an error. So I'm able to clean it up without having to stop any of the demos. So I'm going to start the Seinfeld demo now, and hit number 2. Alright, so you saw that the voices printed out as they were being played. I know in classes talked about putting it in on stream end. I didn't do that. I didn't do it that way because the first voice wasn't printing out. Since it was getting the next voice and then printing it out, that would have meant that, at least how I have it set up, that I would have had to put the first voice print out somewhere else, and that just seemed awkward. And so I actually did it on buffer start because of how I have my playlist set up. That ensured that everything could be printed and I only needed to put it in one place. The other thing I did, so you'll see that it's on demo 1, did that as well. I use all my voices as callbacks, and so if I wanted, what I did though is the printing out of this voice actually ended up interfering with this next demo, the third one, for the printing out of the sound table. Some of these here were actually being put in the middle of the sound table. So what I did was I just created the option of, you could choose whether to print the voice out or not, and by default it will print out the voice name. Otherwise you could turn it off. And so in this third demo you won't see these come in because of that reason. And so this is the priority table. So I'm going to go ahead and start demo 3 for the priority table. Alright, so here, right, like I said, I turned off these printouts, and again, the timestamps aren't the same, but the concept is still the same, and it's still doing it accurately. Adding voices to it, and then, once it gets filled, so this is finally when it's filled up, then it evicts it, right? And so you can tell what gets evicted by the numbers. And so, for instance, 11 was evicted for 12, that kind of thing, right? And then, so here, 100 is evicted. One thing I wanted to call out is that this 150 is not the same, because this one has been going on for less time, right? So that kind of thing, that's how it goes. I'm putting all the tables here so you can see them. You can pause this if you want to verify the results. And then, T13, I stop everything and then print out the table, and there is no table to print. This one, it was hard for me to figure out. I had started it before we really talked about it in class. And so I initially implemented a reactive approach where sounds were put into the table and they stayed there until they needed to be evicted. It didn't mean they were playing, but they just stayed there. And then when another item came in, it would then replace the sound. After talking about it in class, though, it made sense why you would want to actually have that be a callback so that it's immediately removed from the table, and then you don't have to worry or do a check about to see if something's actually still playing. That made sense, and I ended up implementing that after the discussion. It took me a while, but it actually, it paid off huge, because these next two demos, 4 and 5, were very simple after I implemented that callback, because they're just basically the same versions of that, but in a different context. So I'm going to go ahead and start demo number 4, which is the game user callback. Prints out, I believe, the duration, the handle ID, and the pan. Alright, so there that is. You can see it printed out only when it finished. Again, pretty straightforward, nothing too complicated here. The one thing I'll say is that I kept copies of the duration and the pan, shallow copies on the sound call, We talked about it in class on why you wouldn't want to do that. You want to kind of keep it consolidated and maybe put it in the sound manager or something like that, which makes sense. Except I have it on the sound calls. I kind of liked it on the sound calls because it was immediate. But it makes sense why you might not want those there. The next demo is the 5th demo, which is the file loading sync. I did have a bit of an interesting time here. Let me go ahead and run it, and then we'll talk about it more. And so you can't hear it right now, but Beethoven is actually playing. It's very, very soft. I don't know why it's so much softer than the other one. Alright, so that's that. How I did the, just to show the asynchronous file load, just because that one might not be as obvious. I don't know. We'll see when you go through it. But demo 5 was done here. I have all my demos in one file. I mean, I probably should have split those up. Here we go. So basically, I have my game loading callback, and then I go right here. So after A is already started, then I load Beethoven. So it goes to this file thread, loading the command for Beethoven. So if we go to the load command, right? All right. So it calls the buffer manager, adds a buffer, and then obviously after this is done, it goes to the next step. And this is just setting the status to say, hey, the file's been loaded at this point. And then it checks to see if there is a load callback, and if there is, it kicks off the on file loaded. And so the on file loaded will be right here. And this is where, I actually don't need this time. But everything else, so it'll print to the queue, the file queue, it'll print out, it'll say the print of the file's been loaded, and then the audio queue, it'll create the sound since the file has been loaded, and then it'll play it. So that's it for the for my demos. So I mean, this whole project was pretty fun. It was a bit ambiguous at times, which was good and bad. It was good in that it allowed me to really have to think through problems, and I went through the class periods, like the lectures, multiple times to listen to it, and it was definitely rewarding to actually get a lot of the stuff done before any type of code was posted, because it really made it feel like it was more of my own. It did require, though, a lot of refactoring. Once stuff was loaded or talked about more in class, there are some things that I just did really poorly, and it took a long time to refactor. Like the first demo, I did not technically use singletons for my managers, and I think for the second one as well, I don't think I had either. And so by the time I got to the third project, the third PA, I had to redo everything, and it took a while. But again, it was good in that once I got that implemented, I felt really accomplished with it, and I liked having to learn the circular cues and think about how to lock. It was great. It was a great class, and I really enjoyed the demos and putting it together. With that said, this current project that I have, I don't know that I would actually really feel comfortable with this as a production ready item. just because it was like as we moved around along, I learned new things, and then after that, learn new things. I think in the end, I'd probably treat this more like a prototype, and it's working, and then I think I would actually probably start over again with kind of my lessons learned, and I think it would be a very, very cool system. There's just a lot of things to work through, a lot of small little nuances. Again, I like it. I think I like the effort that I put into it, and really trying to make it my own, but it could be a lot better. So definitely grateful for the class. There's a lot to be learned. So that's it. Thank you.